The Valari Concordat had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 1,000 worlds, and their ships moved through space like silver ghosts. They were old when humanity was still learning to make fire. They were powerful when humans were still fighting with swords and spears. And now, in the year 2347, they had finally noticed the young species from Earth. Commander Daniel Shaw stood on the bridge of the U.E.'s horizon and watched the Valari diplomatic station grow larger through the viewport. The station was massive, a spinning wheel of gleaming metal and crystal that caught the light of distant stars. It was beautiful in a way that made Daniel uncomfortable. Beautiful things, in his experience, often hid ugly truths. He was 43 years old, with tired eyes and gray hair at his temples. 20 years in the Earth Defense Fleet had taught him to be careful. 20 years had taught him that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Marsh stood beside him, her arms crossed over her chest. She was younger than Daniel, maybe 35, with short brown hair and a face that rarely smiled. She was his executive officer and his friend, and right now she was thinking the same thing he was. "I don't like this," she said quietly. "Neither do I," Daniel replied. "But we have our orders." The orders had come from the United Earth Council itself. The Valari had reached out to humanity with an offer of friendship and alliance. They wanted to welcome humans into their Concordat, to share technology and knowledge, to help the young species take its place among the stars. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, the Council said. It was everything humanity had dreamed of since first reaching beyond Earth. Daniel had read the reports. He had studied the Valari carefully. They had contacted other species before, dozens of them over the millennia. Some had joined the Concordat willingly. Others had resisted. The ones who resisted were gone now, their worlds empty, their people forgotten. The Valari didn't talk about them. The diplomatic delegation consisted of 12 humans. Ambassador Grace Miller led the civilian team. She was 62 years old, elegant and composed, a woman who had spent her entire life preparing for exactly this moment. She believed in the mission completely. She believed the Valari were sincere. Dr. Kevin Park headed the science team. He was excited, almost giddy at the chance to learn from a species so much more advanced than humanity. He talked constantly about the discoveries they would make, the secrets they would uncover. The military contingent included Daniel, Lisa, and 3 others. Corporal Nathan Cole was the youngest, just 26, a farm boy from Montana who had joined the fleet to see the universe. He was quiet and earnest, the kind of soldier who followed orders without question and trusted his commanders completely. When the Horizon docked with the station, the Valari were waiting for them. They were tall and thin, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Their eyes were strange, shifting colors like oil on water, never settling on one shade for long. They moved with a fluid grace that made human motion seem clumsy by comparison. Their leader was called Sereth. He spoke perfect English, his voice smooth and warm, his manner welcoming. He greeted each human by name, shaking their hands in the human fashion, making each one feel valued and respected. "We are honored by your presence," Sarah said to Ambassador Miller. "Humanity has achieved remarkable things in such a short time. Your species has a brightness to it, a fire that we find most impressive." Grace Miller smiled and thanked him graciously. She had prepared for this moment her entire career, and she was determined to make it a success. The station was even more impressive inside. The corridors were wide and clean, lined with panels that displayed shifting patterns of light. The air smelled faintly of flowers, some alien bloom that Daniel couldn't identify. Everything was designed to put visitors at ease, to make them feel comfortable and safe. Daniel didn't feel comfortable. He didn't feel safe. He watched the Valari guards stationed at every intersection. They carried weapons he didn't recognize, sleek devices that hummed with power. Their eyes tracked the humans as they passed, and Daniel recognized the look. It was the look of predators watching prey. The first 2 days passed smoothly. The Volari hosted meetings and dinners, tours, and presentations. They showed the humans their technology, their art, their history. They spoke of partnership and cooperation, of a future where humans and Volari would work together for the good of all species. Ambassador Miller was delighted. Dr. Park was overwhelmed. Even Lisa began to relax slightly, though she never stopped watching the guards. Nathan Cole was enjoying himself most of all. He had never been off Earth before joining the fleet, and now he was standing in an alien station, eating alien food, talking to beings from another world. He sent messages home to his family every night, describing everything he saw, everything he experienced. His mother wrote back that she was proud of him. His younger sister said she wanted to be just like him someday. On the third day, the Volari hosted a formal dinner to celebrate the progress of the negotiations. The humans were seated at a long table made of some crystal-like material that seemed to glow from within. The food was strange but good, and the wine was excellent. Sareth made a toast to friendship between species, and everyone raised their glasses. Daniel didn't drink. He sat at the table with his glass untouched, watching Sareth carefully. The Volari diplomat was smiling, laughing, charming everyone around him. But sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, his expression changed. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Daniel to notice. There was something cold behind those shifting eyes. Something calculating. Something hungry. Daniel looked around the table at his people. Grace Miller, so full of hope. Kevin Park, so eager to learn. Lisa Marsh, still watchful but starting to believe. Nathan Cole, young and innocent, thinking about the letters he would write to his family. Something was wrong. Daniel could feel it in his bones, in the way the air seemed to hum with tension, in the way the guards had moved closer to the doors. Something was about to happen, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He caught Lisa's eye across the table. She had noticed it too. Her hand moved slowly toward her sidearm, hidden beneath her formal jacket. Her eyes asked a silent question. Daniel shook his head slightly. Not yet. Wait. Nathan Cole pushed back his chair and stood up. He smiled apologetically and asked directions to the facilities. A Volari attendant pointed toward a corridor at the far end of the room. Thank you, Nathan said politely. He turned and began walking toward the corridor, his footsteps echoing on the crystal floor. Daniel watched him go. He watched the guard by the door raise his weapon. He watched the guard's finger move toward the trigger. And then everything changed forever. The sound was not loud. It was a soft hum, almost gentle, like the whisper of wind through leaves. But what it did was not gentle at all. The energy bolt struck Nathan Cole in the lower back, just above his belt. His body jerked once violently, and then his legs simply stopped working. He fell forward onto the crystal floor, his arms reaching out to break his fall, his face twisted in confusion more than pain. He didn't understand what had happened. He didn't understand why he couldn't feel anything below his waist. For a moment, nobody moved. The humans stared in shock at their fallen comrade. The Volari continued eating as if nothing unusual had occurred. Sareth lifted his wine glass and took a small sip, his shifting eyes watching the scene with interest. Then Lisa Marsh was on her feet, her sidearm in her hand before anyone could react. She moved with the speed and precision of someone who had trained for violence her entire adult life. Her weapon pointed at the guard who had fired, her finger tight on the trigger. Daniel Shaw was already moving toward Nathan. He dropped to his knees beside the young man, his hands pressing against the wound in his back. The flesh was burned and blackened, the spine beneath clearly damaged. Daniel had seen enough combat injuries to know what this meant. Nathan would never walk again. If he survived at all, what is this? Ambassador Grace Miller demanded. Her voice shook with anger and fear. 40 years of diplomatic training couldn't prepare anyone for this. What have you done? Sareth set down his wine glass and stood slowly. His movements were unhurried, almost lazy. He looked at the humans the way a scientist might look at insects trapped in a jar. I apologize for the confusion, he said. His voice was still smooth, still warm, but now there was something else underneath it. Something cold and sharp. It seems there has been a misunderstanding about the nature of this gathering. More guards entered the room from every door. They moved quickly and efficiently, surrounding the table, their weapons raised and ready. There were at least 30 of them now, far too many for the handful of armed humans to fight. Lisa kept her weapon trained on Sareth. Her hand was steady, her eyes hard. Give me a reason, she said quietly. Please. Sareth smiled at her, and the smile was terrible. It was the smile of someone who had won before the game even started. You were not invited here for diplomacy, Commander Shaw, he said, turning to address Daniel. Your species was invited so we could assess whether you pose any threat to Valari interests. Daniel looked up from Nathan's body. His hands were covered in blood, warm and red against his skin. And what did you decide? That you do. Sareth clasped his hands behind his back, like a teacher explaining a simple lesson to slow students. Humanity is young, but you grow fast. Too fast. You adapt, you learn, you spread. In another century, perhaps two, you will be powerful enough to challenge us. We have seen this pattern before with other species. We have learned to address such problems early. Kevin Park had gone pale. He was a scientist, not a soldier. He had spent his life studying the universe, not fighting in it. What are you saying? What do you mean, address? Containment, Sarah said simply. Your delegation will be held here while we determine the most efficient method of dealing with your species. There are several options. Sterilization of your core worlds would be quick but wasteful. Genetic modification to reduce your more aggressive traits might be more practical. Or we could simply take your colonies one by one, slowly, so your people never quite realize what is happening until it is too late. Grace Miller stood frozen, her face white as paper. Everything she had believed, everything she had worked for, crumbled around her like sandcastles in a rising tide. You promised us peace, she whispered. Sarath's smile widened. We promised you many things. We have found that promises are useful tools for managing lesser species. They keep you calm and cooperative while we prepare. On the floor, Nathan Cole groaned in pain. He was trying to move, trying to crawl toward his friends, but his legs wouldn't obey. He could feel nothing below his ribs. He was 26 years old, and he would spend whatever remained of his life in a wheelchair. If the Valari let him live that long, Daniel stood slowly, his bloody hands hanging at his sides. He looked at Sareth with an expression the Valari had never seen on a human face before. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something colder, something deeper. It was the look of a man who had just made a decision that would change everything. You shot an unarmed man in the back, Daniel said. His voice was quiet, controlled. He was walking away from you. He wasn't a threat. He was just a kid from Montana who wanted to see the stars. Sareth waved a hand dismissively. A demonstration. To establish the proper hierarchy between our species. Your people needed to understand their position. Oh, we understand, Daniel said. We understand perfectly. The guards moved closer, forcing the humans into a tight group at the center of the room. They were separated from each other, searched roughly, their weapons taken. Lisa surrendered her sidearm, only when 3 guards pointed their weapons at Kevin's head. Nathan was left where he had fallen. The Valari stepped around him like he was furniture, an obstacle in their path rather than a living being. One guard kicked him accidentally, or perhaps not accidentally, as he passed. "Take them to the detention level," Sareth ordered. "Keep them separated. I want daily reports on their psychological condition. It will be useful data for managing other human populations later." As the guards led them away, Daniel caught Lisa's eye one more time. He nodded once, slightly, and she nodded back. They had served together for years. They didn't need words to communicate. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. The Valari had made a mistake. They had studied human history. They had read about human wars and human cruelty. They thought they understood what humans were capable of. But they had missed something important. They had seen that humans could be violent and brutal, but they hadn't understood what made humans truly dangerous. It wasn't their violence. It wasn't their cruelty. It was their stubbornness. Humans didn't give up. Humans didn't surrender. Humans fought and struggled and clawed their way forward, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. They had climbed out of caves and crossed oceans and reached for the stars. Not because it was easy, but because they refused to accept that anything was impossible. The Valari had ruled for 12,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of species. They had never met a species like humanity before. They would learn. In his cell that night, Daniel Shaw sat in the darkness and thought about Nathan Cole lying on that crystal floor. He thought about the look on Sarath's face, the casual cruelty, the absolute certainty of superiority. He thought about Earth and all the people who didn't know yet that their species had been marked for extinction. He thought about what he was going to do about it. The Valari believed that humans were broken. They believed that a show of force, a demonstration of power, would make the humans submit. They had used this technique on dozens of species before. It had always worked. They didn't know that somewhere in the darkness, in a small cell on their own station, a human commander was already planning their destruction. The docking bay was enormous, a cavern of metal and machinery that housed dozens of ships from across the Valari Concordat. The UES Horizon sat in the corner, small and ugly compared to the elegant Valari vessels around it. To Daniel Shaw, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Between them and the ship stood 40 guards. They crouched in the shadows of a maintenance corridor, watching the patrols move through the bay. Kevin had calculated the timing. The guards rotated every 15 minutes, which left a window of perhaps 30 seconds when the path to the horizon was clear. 30 seconds for 7 people, one of whom couldn't walk. "It's impossible," Kevin whispered. "We can't make it." "Yes, we can," Lisa replied. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. "We just have to create a distraction." Grace looked at her. "What kind of distraction?" Lisa smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "The kind that makes a lot of noise." During their escape from the detention level, Lisa had collected several items from the Valari guards she had killed. Weapons, communication devices, and 3 small power cells that hummed with contained energy. Kevin had explained that the power cells were unstable when removed from their housings. Any significant impact would cause them to explode. "I'll take the far end of the bay," Lisa said. "When the guards come to investigate, you make your run for the ship." Daniel shook his head. "We stay together, Daniel." Lisa put her hand on his shoulder. "Someone has to cover the retreat. Someone has to make sure the rest of you get away. Then I'll do it." "No, you're the commander. Nathan needs you to carry him. Grace and Kevin need you to lead them." She squeezed his shoulder once, then let go. "This is my job. Let me do it." They looked at each other for a long moment. They had served together for 7 years. They had survived battles and missions and countless dangers. Daniel had always known that one day their luck would run out. He had just hoped it wouldn't be like this. "Come back," he said. "That's an order." Lisa smiled. I always follow orders, sir. Eventually, she slipped away into the shadows before he could say anything else. 3 minutes later, the first explosion shook the docking bay. The guards reacted immediately, rushing toward the source of the blast. Lisa appeared on a catwalk above them, firing down into their ranks, drawing their attention and their fire. She moved like a dancer, graceful and deadly, staying one step ahead of the energy bolts that scorched the air around her. Now, Daniel shouted. They ran. Kevin sprinted ahead, his long legs covering the distance quickly. Grace followed close behind, her age forgotten in the rush of adrenaline. Daniel carried Nathan on his back, the young man's arms wrapped around his neck, his useless legs bouncing with every step. The Horizon's hatch was open. Kevin reached it first, his hands flying over the control panel, bringing the ship's systems online. Grace stumbled through the door, gasping for breath. Daniel was right behind her, laying Nathan gently on the deck. "Where's Lisa?" Nathan asked. Another explosion rocked the bay. Daniel looked back and saw Lisa still on the catwalk, still fighting, still drawing the guards away from the ship. She was surrounded now, the Valari closing in from all sides. Her weapon was empty, discarded. She pulled a knife from somewhere and kept fighting. "Daniel!" Kevin shouted from the cockpit. "We have to go. Their reinforcements are coming." Daniel stood at the hatch, watching his friend fight. He could still save her. He could run back, help her, give her a chance. But if he did, the ship would be taken, and everyone else would die. Lisa looked up and caught his eye across the bay. She knew what he was thinking. She shook her head once, firmly. "Go." "Daniel!" Kevin shouted again. "Close the hatch," Daniel said quietly. The door slid shut, cutting off his view of the bay. A moment later, the Horizon's engines roared to life, and the ship lurched into motion. They blasted out of the docking bay at full speed, ignoring the station's demands to halt, ignoring the weapons that fired after them. Kevin flew like a man possessed, pushing the ship beyond its limits, throwing it into maneuvers that should have torn it apart. Behind them, the station grew smaller in the viewport. Daniel watched it until it was just a point of light among the stars. "She's gone," Grace said softly. She put her hand on Daniel's arm. "I'm sorry." Daniel said nothing. There was nothing to say. They had escaped. 7 people had entered the station. 5 had come out. Lisa Marsh had given her life so they could flee. 3 power cells and a borrowed knife against 40 armed guards. She had bought them maybe 2 minutes. It had been enough. Kevin set course for Earth at maximum speed. The journey would take 3 days. 3 days for Daniel to think about what had happened. 3 days to plan what would come next. Nathan lay on a bunk in the ship's small medical bay, sedated against the pain. His spine was destroyed. Earth's doctors might be able to help him walk again with cybernetic implants, but that was months or years away. For now, he was just a young man from Montana who had wanted to see the stars and had paid the highest price. Grace sat in the common room, writing a report for the United Earth Council. Her hands shook as she typed. Everything she had believed about the galaxy, about diplomacy, about the possibility of peace between species had been shattered. She would spend the rest of her life rebuilding those beliefs, or perhaps learning to live without them. Kevin stayed at the helm, watching the stars streak past. He was replaying the station's power patterns in his mind, noting weaknesses, identifying vulnerabilities. The Valari had technology far beyond anything humanity possessed, but technology could be studied. Technology could be understood. Technology could be defeated. And Daniel sat alone in his quarters, staring at the wall, thinking about Sarath's smile. The Valari had 12,000 years of history. They had conquered or assimilated hundreds of species. They believed humanity would be just another conquest, another line in their records, another species that rose and fell and was forgotten. They were wrong. Daniel Shaw had lost 5 people on that station. He had lost Lisa Marsh, who had been his friend and his right hand. He had watched Nathan Cole get shot in the back for no reason except cruelty. He had seen the casual contempt in Sarath's eyes, the absolute certainty that humans were nothing. He would remember that certainty. He would remember it when the Valari ships came to Earth. He would remember it when the war began. He would remember it when he stood over the ruins of everything the Valari had built and watched it burn. The horizon limped through space, damaged but unbroken. Behind it, the Valari were already mobilizing their fleet. They would come for Earth soon, expecting to find a species ready to surrender, ready to submit, ready to be conquered like all the others. They would find something different. They would find humanity, and they would learn why that was something to fear. The war lasted 7 years. It began 3 months after the Horizon returned to Earth, when a Valari fleet appeared in the solar system and demanded humanity's unconditional surrender. The United Earth Council's response was broadcast across every channel, heard by every human on every world humanity had settled. Go to hell. The Valari had expected this would be easy. They had conquered hundreds of species over 12,000 years. None had resisted for more than a few months. Humanity had 300 ships against their 10,000. Primitive technology against weapons that could crack planets. And a population scattered across a dozen poorly defended colonies. They were so confident that they didn't even bring their full fleet. It was a mistake. They would not make twice. The first year was brutal. The Valari took colony after colony, driving humanity back toward Earth. Millions died in the fighting. Millions more died in the bombardments that followed. Entire cities reduced to ash and rubble. The Valari didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They simply erased everything in their path. But humanity didn't break. They fought for every rock, every moon, every station. They used guerrilla tactics that the Valari had never seen before, hitting supply lines and running before the enemy could respond. They captured Valari ships and studied them, learning their secrets. Adapting their technology. Nathan Cole commanded the intelligence division from his wheelchair on Earth. He had received the cybernetic implants that let him use his legs, but he chose to remain in the chair. He said it helped him remember. It helped him focus. Every analyst who worked for him knew his story. They knew why they were fighting. Daniel Shaw led the fleet that defended Earth. He had been promoted 3 times during the war, not because he wanted rank, but because the people above him kept dying. He fought with a cold fury that terrified his enemies and inspired his soldiers. He never forgot Lisa Marsh. He never forgot the 5 who had died on the station. He carried their names with him into every battle. Grace Miller became the voice of humanity to the galaxy. She traveled to every species the Valari had conquered, every world that chafed under Concordat rule. She told them humanity's story. She told them about the dinner where peace was promised and a young man was shot in the spine for walking to the bathroom. She told them that the Valari could be fought. She told them that the Valari could be beaten. By the 3rd year, rebellions had broken out on 40 Concordat worlds. Kevin Park led the research division that reverse-engineered Valari technology. Within 2 years, human ships could match Valari vessels in speed and firepower. Within 4 years, they were superior. Kevin had always believed that knowledge was the most dangerous weapon. He proved it with every innovation, every breakthrough, every new system that gave humanity an edge. Sarath watched his empire crumble and could not understand what had gone wrong. He had studied human history. He had seen their wars, their genocides, their endless conflicts with each other. He had concluded that they were a violent, self-destructive species that would collapse under pressure. He had been certain that one demonstration of Valari power would break their spirit forever. He had been wrong about everything. In the 5th year of the war, the Valari lost control of their core systems. The rebellions that Grace Miller had sparked spread like wildfire, species that had been conquered millennia ago, rising up against their masters. The Concordat's military was stretched thin, fighting on 100 fronts, unable to hold what they had taken. Human ships appeared in Valari space for the first time. They didn't come to conquer. They came to help the rebels, to provide weapons and training and support. They asked for nothing in return except a promise that when the war was over, the galaxy would remember who had stood against tyranny. In the 6th year, Daniel Shaw led the assault on the Valari homeworld. The battle lasted 3 days. The Valari threw everything they had at the human fleet, desperate to protect their capital, their history, their pride. Daniel lost half his ships. He lost friends he had known for years. He lost pieces of himself that he would never get back, but he won. When the Valari High Council sued for peace, it was Grace Miller who received them. She was 70 years old now, her hair white as snow, her eyes still sharp and clear. She had spent 8 years fighting for humanity's survival. She had earned the right to speak for them. Sareth was among the Valari delegation. He was old now, his blue skin faded to gray, his shifting eyes dull with exhaustion. He looked at Grace and saw something that frightened him for the first time in his long life. "You want surrender," Grace said. It wasn't a question. "We want this to end," Sareth replied. "Name your terms." Grace smiled, and there was no warmth in it. 12,000 years, she said. "That's how long your Concordat has ruled. You've conquered hundreds of species. You've made them all forget who they were before you came. You thought you could do the same to us." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "We didn't forget. We never forget. We wrote down everything that happened on your station. We told our children. We told every species we could reach. And we kept fighting until there was nothing left of your empire but ashes." She turned back to face him. "The Concordat is finished. Every species you conquered is free now. Every world you controlled will govern itself. And humanity will make sure it stays that way." Sareth's eyes shifted colors rapidly, a sign of distress that Grace had learned to recognize years ago. "What will you do to us?" he asked. Grace considered the question. She thought about Nathan Cole in his wheelchair, about Lisa Marsh dying alone on a catwalk surrounded by enemies, about the millions of humans who had given their lives in this war. She thought about everything the Valari had done, everything they had planned to do. "Nothing," she said finally. "We're not going to destroy your species or modify your genes or sterilize your worlds. We're not going to do any of the things you plan to do to us." Sareth looked confused. "Then what?" "We're going to let you live with what you've lost. We're going to let you spend the next 1,000 years watching the species you enslaved build something better than anything you ever created. And every time you look at the stars, you're going to remember that you had the chance to be our friends. And instead, you shot a boy from Montana in the spine." She walked to the door. "That's your punishment, Sareth. Memory. Knowing what you could have had. And what you chose instead." The treaty was signed the next day. The Valari Concordat officially dissolved. The hundreds of species they had controlled formed a new alliance, one based on cooperation rather than conquest, on trade rather than tribute. Humanity didn't ask to lead the alliance. They didn't want an empire. They just wanted to make sure that what had happened to them would never happen to anyone else. Nathan Cole attended the ceremony where the treaty was signed. He still used his wheelchair, though he could walk with assistance now. When reporters asked him why he didn't use his new legs, he gave the same answer he always gave. "I want to remember," he said. "I want everyone to remember." A memorial was built on Earth in a park that overlooked the ocean. It carried the names of everyone who had died in the war, starting with the 5 who had been killed on the station and ending with the last soldier who fell in the final battle. Lisa Marsh's name was near the top of the list. The inscription at the base of the memorial was simple. It came from Lisa's final transmission, the one she had sent just before the Valari killed her. Make them remember us. They did, 1,000 years later. Children in schools across the galaxy still learned about the war. They learned about a species that refused to surrender, that fought against impossible odds, that never forgot and never forgave. They learned about Daniel Shaw and Grace Miller and Kevin Park and Nathan Cole. And they learned a lesson that the Valari had taught, though not the lesson the Valari had intended. Never underestimate humanity. Never assume they will break. Never believe they will forget. And never, ever shoot one of them in the spine, because they will remember. They will come for you, and they will not stop until they have shown the entire galaxy what happens to those who betray the trust of the human race. The stars had seen many empires rise and fall. They had witnessed countless species bloom and fade. But they had never seen anything quite like humanity, and they never forgot. The Valkyrie response fleet emerged from Fold space at the edge of the Kepler system 6 months and 12 days after the destruction of Supreme Arbiter Kethral's vessel. 12 capital ships, each one massive and bristling with weapons, formed a perfect wedge formation as they advanced toward the inner planets. Supreme Commander Zethral stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars through the forward viewport. He was younger than his brother had been, but no less ambitious. The High Council had given him command of the largest fleet ever assembled against a single enemy, with orders to make an example of the humans that the rest of the galaxy would never forget. He had studied the recordings of his brother's final battle countless times. He had analyzed every aspect of the human attack, looking for weaknesses and patterns. He would not underestimate these creatures, as Kethral had done. Supreme Commander, his tactical officer, reported, "We are detecting multiple contacts throughout the system. Human vessels. How many? Initial count is over 300. They appear to be hiding behind moons and in asteroid fields." Zethral felt a flicker of surprise but did not let it show on his face. 300 ships was far more than intelligence had predicted. The humans had been busy during the past 6 months. "It does not matter," he said confidently. "Our 12 ships carry enough firepower to destroy 10 times that number. Order the fleet to advance." The Valkyrie formation moved deeper into the system, their weapons charged and ready. Zethral expected the humans to flee or attempt to negotiate. Every species in the galaxy knew that fighting the Valkyrie directly was suicide, but the humans did not flee. As the Valkyrie fleet approached, the human ships began to emerge from their hiding places. They formed into groups of 15 to 20 vessels, spreading out across a wide front. And then they began to accelerate toward the Valkyrie fleet. Zethral watched the tactical display with growing concern. The human ships were not forming defensive lines. They were not preparing to run. They were charging directly at his fleet, just as that single patrol vessel had charged at his brother's ship 6 months ago. "All ships, open fire," he commanded. "Destroy them before they can close the distance." Energy beams lanced out across the void, brilliant streams of light designed to vaporize enemy vessels. The Valkyrie gunners were well trained, and their first volley destroyed a dozen human ships in seconds, but the others kept coming. On the bridge of the Defiant II, Admiral Patricia Cole stood at the center of organized chaos. Her carrier was the largest vessel in the human fleet, serving as the command ship for the entire operation. Around her, officers coordinated the movements of over 300 vessels, directing the battle like conductors leading an orchestra. "First wave is engaging," her tactical officer reported. "We've lost 14 ships, but the remaining vessels have closed to weapons range." Cole nodded grimly. She had known there would be losses. The Valkyrie were powerful, and even with their new weapons, the humans were outmatched ship for ship. But they had numbers on their side, and they had something else that the Valkyrie could not match. They had will. "Signal all ships," Cole ordered. "Remember the Defiant. Commence attack." The human fleet opened fire with their new kinetic weapons. Mass drivers hurled tungsten projectiles at speeds that turned simple metal slugs into instruments of destruction. The projectiles crossed the distance between the fleets in heartbeats, striking Valkyrie shields that had never been designed to stop them. Zethral watched in disbelief as the first of his capital ships reported shield failures. The human projectiles were punching through defenses that had stopped every weapon in the galaxy. His tactical display showed cascading damage across his entire fleet. Systems failing, hull breaches spreading, crew members dying. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our shields should be impervious." His science officer ran frantic calculations. "The projectiles are unguided, Supreme Commander. Solid mass with no electronic signature. Our shields interpret them as debris and do not fully engage." The same weakness that had killed his brother. The same simple truth that the humans had discovered through sacrifice and desperation. The mighty Valkyrie Empire, with all its advanced technology, could be beaten by throwing rocks. The battle raged for hours. Human ships died by the dozens, their hulls torn apart by Valkyrie energy weapons. But for every human ship that fell, another took its place, continuing the attack without pause or mercy. And the kinetic projectiles kept coming, hammering the Valkyrie shields until they collapsed, then tearing through the exposed hulls beneath. One Valkyrie capital ship exploded, then another, then a third. Zethral ordered his fleet to fall back, to create distance so their superior range could be brought to bear. But the humans followed, pressing the attack with a ferocity that bordered on madness. "They won't stop," his tactical officer said, fear evident in his voice. "No matter how many we destroy, they keep coming." Zethral thought of his brother's final recording, the last words Kethral had spoken before his ship was destroyed. The human commander had refused to surrender even when given the chance, even when offered negotiations. The humans had simply kept coming, accepting death rather than defeat. 5 hours after the battle began, it was over. 9 Valkyrie capital ships had been destroyed, their debris joining the remains of the original vessel still drifting through the system. 2 ships had been captured when their crews surrendered rather than face certain death. Only Zethral's flagship remained combat capable, and it was badly damaged. The Supreme Commander made the only decision he could. He ordered a retreat dot as his flagship limped toward the fold point, preparing to escape back to Valkyrie space. Zethral looked back at the system he had come to conquer. The humans had lost 87 ships. Thousands of their people had died in the battle. By any reasonable calculation, they should have given up long ago, but they had not given up. They had fought until the Valkyrie could fight no more. They had won, on the Defiant too. Admiral Cole allowed herself a moment of quiet relief as the surviving Valkyrie ship disappeared into fold space. The battle was over. Humanity had won its first major victory against an interstellar power. The cost had been high. 87 ships, thousands of lives. Good people who had families waiting for them back home. People who had known the risks and chosen to fight anyway. "Admiral," her communications officer spoke up, "we're receiving messages from across the sector. Other species, ones the Valkyrie have conquered or threatened. They're asking about us. They want to know how we did it." Cole looked out at the debris field that marked humanity's triumph. "Tell them the truth. Tell them that 6 months ago, a single ship with 47 crew members showed us the way. Tell them that humanity chose collision. They're also asking if we'll help them," the officer continued. "If we'll stand with them against the Valkyrie." Cole thought about Captain Hayes and Grace Morrison and Amy Santos and all the others who had given their lives at Kepler 7b. She thought about what they had died for, about the future they had made possible. They had not just saved a colony. They had not just destroyed an enemy ship. They had changed the course of history. "Tell them yes," she said finally. "Tell them that's exactly what we're going to do." On Kepler 7b, Administrator Claire Dawson stood before the memorial statue as news of the victory spread through the colony. People were celebrating in the streets, cheering and crying and hugging strangers. 3,000 people who were alive because of what the Defiant's crew had done were now joined by thousands more who had come to build a new life on this world. Dawson looked at the bronze faces of the 47 heroes. She had never met any of them personally, but she felt like she knew them. She had read their service records, studied their photographs, memorized their stories. They had become part of her, part of everyone who lived on this world. "We won," she said softly, though no one was close enough to hear. "Your sacrifice meant something. It meant everything." The statue stood silent and eternal, facing the stars. 47 ordinary people who had done something extraordinary. 47 humans who had refused to kneel. Across the galaxy, the word spread. The Valkyrie Empire had been defeated in open battle. The unconquerable had been conquered. And it had started with a single ship, a single captain. A single choice made in 30 seconds dot in the void between stars, wherever human ships traveled. The story passed from crew to crew, generation to generation. It became legend, then myth, then something more. It became the foundation of a new human identity, a reminder of what they were capable of, a promise of what they would become. Children grew up hearing about Captain Daniel Hayes and the crew of the Defiant. They learned about courage and sacrifice and the refusal to surrender. They understood that being human meant standing up for what was right, even when the odds were impossible, even when victory seemed hopeless, even when the cost was everything. And whenever they faced their own impossible moments, their own desperate choices, they remembered. They remembered the Defiant. They remembered the 30 seconds that changed everything. They remembered what it meant to choose collision, and they flew forward, unafraid.